Father God, we just give you thanks because you are a good, good God. And Father, you've just come here today because you want to breathe something into us. There's a word that you have for us. There's a message you want us to receive. Help me get out of the way and open up all our hearts to receive from you. Amen. Awesome. Hey, can I introduce you to my family first? I'll just throw the picture up there. Don't worry, babe. I'm not going to get you to come up. I know you hate it. So that's, I'm Woon. Did I say that? I'm Woon. I'm part of the team here. That's me on the right there, if you didn't catch that. That's my wife, Amy. She's amazing and she's beautiful. And that's Isla, my 4-year-old, and Lulu. I think she's about 7 or 8 months old now. Hands up if you have kids that are under 5 years old. How hard is it? Like, seriously, how hard is it? I wouldn't normally let you do this, but if you've got kids under 5 years old, I'll let you cross your arms, close your eyes and pretend that you're praying, slant down into your chair just a little bit, and I'm going to preach for 45 minutes just so you get one sleep cycle in, okay? So that's what I'm going to do for you today, because I know how painful it is. But there is hope. Throw up the next picture. That's not my second wife or an au pair. That is my 17-year-old, Nevada, and she's an angel. Thank you, Jesus, you gave me one. So, but there is hope for the other two. I just want to introduce to my family because I love them heaps, and let's get on with the word, eh? So I've come here to speak to you about impact today. I shared a message similar 4 weeks ago, and I've been asked to come and share it again. And it's interesting what God actually does. You know, like I've never journaled in my life. I take notes in my phone, but I really got into the Thrive journaling and absolutely love it. And it's so incredible. You know when God's actually speaking when it comes from so many different areas. And so I've just got confirmation after confirmation that today was the right time to preach this message, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But I'm not much of a preacher, but I love telling stories. So I'm just going to tell you a heap of stories today, and hopefully you get something out of it. I'm going to start with showing you a video. Can we do that? Thanks, boys.
I'm Jasmine, I'm 18 from the Central Coast, and I decided to go to Bali for schoolies last December with a bunch of friends from school, 15 from my school and 30 from another local school. I was there for 10 days to begin with until I had a bit of an incident when I was out. Me and a group of friends went out, and I decided that I wouldn't drink that much for the night. I'd have 1 or 2 because I had stuff to do in the morning. I was out at Bounty with about 10 other people, and I had 1 drink and I got halfway through my second and started feeling like really ill, sick. Like I stopped drinking, I got water, and by that stage I started feeling dizzy, like my eyesight was going blurry and funny, like my eyes were watering but they weren't. A few friends came and found me and they decided they were going to take me home. My friend spotted the Red Frog tent from a distance and decided to take me down there before she took me back to the hotel. When we got there, they realised there was something further going on with me and that they would need to take me to a hospital. One of the Red Frog people was medically trained and noticed that I wasn't just drunk and that I definitely, no matter what, needed to go to a hospital to be sure. Another of the Red Frog crew members actually spoke Indonesian and went to a taxi driver and assured that we got a taxi to the hospital as soon as we can. That I seriously needed to get there, or if I had been taken back to the hotel, this could have ended a lot differently, and they're not sure what would have happened from there, and I was just really lucky.
G'day, I'm Errol Baker. I'm Jasmine Baker's dad. My day started at 4:30 in the morning. I missed a phone call from Indonesia, where my daughter was having her schoolies break. And then it was confusion from there, trying to work out exactly what this number was and where it come from. It took a huge amount of time to find that out. And then to realise that you're ringing the Denpasar Hospital, basically my heart sunk. Probably from that 5 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the morning, I can't explain the emotions. Here I am crying now, but at that stage it was just trying to hold it together. And then the insurance company rang through and said, we're airlifting her out. And at that stage then, we realised how severe it was, and just how close we were to probably not seeing Jasmine again. We found out that she was being airlifted back to Darwin, so then it was a mad rush to try and locate flights, hotels, accommodation and all that kind of stuff, and just to get there to be by her side. The medical staff in Darwin Hospital were fantastic. Basically talked us through what was going on with Jazz and what could have happened. And that's when we had a little bit of communication with some of her friends in Bali and actually found out what happened. And then really when the story came out that if it hadn't have been for her two friends and the Red Frog crew that were in Bali, and how lucky we were that the Red Frog crew were there on that given week, and that made a huge difference in this story. And I feel if the Red Frog crew hadn't been there, this wouldn't have ended really, really well. This would have been another statistic of what really happens when you travel overseas and this kind of stuff happens.
The Red Frogs being there in that situation for me changed it. If they were there another day or it was later and they weren't there, this situation could have been extremely different, and it was very important that they were there. Like, they changed a lot for me. If I had gone back to the hotel, this could have been potentially fatal, and I'm just really lucky they were there to help me in that circumstance.
So Jasmine Baker was one of the schoolies from Newcastle Central Coast that was up at Bali a few years ago. If you don't know, we're the home of Red Frogs here in Victoria, and we have been for 15 years. That particular year we sent 15 guys from this church, including myself, to Red Frogs in Bali, and that's how we came in contact with her. I think we look at that and go, that's incredible impact that you can have in someone's life, but I think it's really easy to forget that there was a massive process that led us up to there, and actually God had taken us on a journey. And that journey actually started, and I won't go into all of it, but there will be opportunities for me to share with you about Red Frogs in more detail in the future. But I want to say this, 21 years ago, when a young youth pastor named Andy Goulet went to try and make an impact on the Gold Coast, to penetrate that schoolies culture on the Gold Coast that was happening back then, he had no idea that we were going to land here. And 15 years ago, our very own youth pastor from here, Mark Jolly, who's currently now at Kew Baptist, was impacted by Andy's story on how it began, and went up to the Gold Coast to have a look at what was going on. And that same year, came back with a bunch of Red Frogs in his hands, grabbed a bunch of young adults from this church and went down to Lorne. And I'll tell you what, it was tough going. They had people chasing them out of caravan parks. They had people calling the police and security and just chasing them out of town, calling them, Bible bashers and things like this. So it was a tough road, but they persevered. 2 years after that, which was in 2004, I gave my life to Christ. I came into this church, baptised here. And Mark was one of my first friends. There was a council meeting that was going to happen, and Mark said to me, would you mind coming with me to this council meeting? And I said, absolutely, let's do that. Because the council figured that they couldn't get rid of Mark and his bunch of Bible bashers, so let's bring him into our meeting and see if we can bully him out that way, okay? So they did that. I sat in the meeting with them. I think I was wearing a suit that day because then I was an investigator in the sexual offences and child abuse unit, and we went around the table and there were just smirks at us. I didn't tell them I was in the police force until later on because I knew there'd be an opportunity there somewhere. And so would you have it, back then the biggest problem that they had on the surf coast down at Lorne and Torquay was what? Problem with? Sexual assault. Sexual assault during Schoolies Week. And what was God doing with my career back then? Preparing me for that moment right then to speak into that situation. And so instantly there was credibility for Mark and I and for the church. And so our message to them was, we're here to serve. And so they made us serve. So they made us do all the dodgy stuff that they didn't want to do. We weren't even allowed to wear our T-shirts. We had to drive their buses, which is great, but we had to wear their T-shirts. We couldn't talk about God. We couldn't talk about our faith. We couldn't even give out red frogs. But we had to prove that we wanted to serve. And so we did that. And eventually, the fruit made way. We started having great impact on the Surf Coast. The Bass Coast Council heard about it, so they've asked us to start a program in Phillip Island and Rye, which we did. Then we moved to Byron Bay and Gold Coast Week 2, all run out of here, all run out of Victoria. And then in 2012, the Australian government rings us up and says, hey, look, we've got a problem in Bali, can you go? And we go, yeah, we can. So we got to Bali. We met a young girl called Kayla Smith. She was suffering from methanol poisoning. Didn't know what it was at the time. Thank God. He made a way. We got her to the hospital on the back of a scooter, sandwiched between two people. You would never, ever dream of doing that in a million years in Australia, but that's what we had to do there. So we learned. We learned about methanol poisoning. And then, 2 years after that, we put together a medical team from this church, and they'd be really embarrassed if I said their names, so I won't say Rachel Sticker, Kathy Franklin, or Georgia Hicks. Together with David Chittenden, we went over there after learning about methanol poisoning, and we were there at the right place at the right time, and Jasmine Baker was brought to our tent. So you see, to have big impact, there's a lot of incremental steps that take place along the way. So my encouragement to you is, you just don't know how close your impact is. You just don't know how significant you're going to be around the next corner. So keep doing what God has placed in your hands. And because we're a good Baptist church, I better use some scripture to back that up. I love the story of David and Goliath. I love it. But I love it more when I understand it from the beginning. You know, when the prophet Samuel was sent to Jesse's house to anoint the king of Israel in 1 Samuel 16, he goes there and he picks the most unassuming son that Jesse had, in fact, the smallest. And he wasn't even invited to the party. He was out in the field tending to the sheep and the goats. And so Jesse calls his son in, and here's David standing in front of Samuel, and Samuel goes, that's the one. That's the one I'm going to anoint. What happened after David was anointed as king of Israel? What happened? Did he go straight to the palace? Where'd he go? Yeah. He went back to the pasture of which he came. He went back to the pasture. And I think that was really, really significant. Because sometimes I think God puts a promise on our heart and we want to get there straight away. But we don't understand that there's a process that we need to go through to get there. And what was God doing in David's life and heart back in the pasture? What was he teaching him? Animal killing. Thanks, Al. You've seen that, I know. We know the story of David and Goliath. He killed him with sling and a stone, not a slingshot, a sling and stones. But what we forget, he also played the what? The lyre or the harp, 10-string harp. It wasn't the sling that got David to the palace, it was the lyre that got David to the palace. So you just don't know what God is doing with what's in your hands right now. Yeah? And so my encouragement to you is work on what's on your hand right now. The obvious and the not so obvious. I've got a really not so obvious gift. It's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And most people laugh when I say I do this because most people don't like hugging sweaty men. But I love it. It's weird. None of my mates do it. I mean, I've got mates now, but none of my mates that I grew up with like doing it with me. But I tell you what, it's actually that gift that's given me so many opportunities to impact people than anything else in my life. So what my encouragement to you is, work on what's in your hand. The obvious and the not so obvious. And so there's one more thing that God was doing to David in the pasture, and that was working on his heart. Yeah, I think it's really, really difficult for us to be given a vision and a promise and a hope and something to step into, and then getting sent back to where you came from. But I think God was doing something in David's heart, was teaching him obedience, humility, patience. Yeah? And you'll find actually, if you keep reading on in 1 Samuel 16, David ends up in the palace, but he keeps doing what? He keeps going back to the pasture, tending to the sheep. And I don't know about you, that'd be pretty difficult. And I've faced this in my life before, where I've got to where I want to go to, but someone says, go back to where you were so that you can serve there. Has anyone else had that? And right at that moment, for me, it's a heart check. And God's saying to me, do you still have the humility that you once had when you were down there? You know, where you are now. So my encouragement to you is that, you know, sometimes the process isn't in a straight line. Sometimes the process is all over the place. But trust God and keep working on what's in your hands. Is that cool? Awesome. Let's look at point 2. This is probably my most exciting part of the message, without taking anything away from point 3. By the way, I put 3 points together just for you. A good Baptist message, 3 points application. So, but point 2, if you want to have impact, you've got to have sacrifice. Okay? And that's probably just a dad coming out in me. Like, you know, my 17-year-old, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I'll go, hey, sweetie, just do the work, you know. So if we throw up the slide, I want to talk to you about impact. And I want to talk to you about sacrifice. And I want to talk to you about a particular person that I know of, that I've studied. He's not alive now. Goodness, I wish he was, because I'd be spending so much time with this guy. His life impressed me so much. I'm not going to be able to go through all of it. One day I'll sit down with you and talk to you about him, but I'm going to just draw out one part of his life, okay? And it happened if we just pull up the map, in Lithuania. When Robbie was fixing the slide for me, the little red bubble moved, but Lithuania doesn't actually go across, is it or something? Lithuania is that yellow bit that's just between Latvia and Poland, okay? So this is where the story takes place. And it was in July, August 1940, okay? During the war, all right? We go to the next slide. And during the war, the Nazi Germans were moving from the west to the east, occupying Poland, and then taking up ground in Lithuania. And so the story really starts with a man called Joseph Shimkin, okay, a Jewish man. And as all the Jews were getting rounded up, they were forced, because the Russians were in the east, you see, and so the Jews were forced to flee, but they needed a transit visa to get out of there, okay? And so Joseph Shimkin went to all the consulars to try get a transit visa to get out of Lithuania, and they all said no to him, but the very last consular was the Japanese consular. Now, it was crazy for him to even go there because Japan and Germany had just entered an alliance, okay? But he had no other choice. And it's interesting what you do when you're forced into a corner. So he walks into the consular office and he meets this man here. Shunai Senpo Sugihara. Put your hand up if you know this guy. Awesome. Hardly anyone knows him, but yet he's had the most impact on this world and still does. In the night service when I preach this, Alex and Honor are actually Jewish and they're from Lithuania. And I caught up with them afterwards and my goodness, it was so amazing. And so if you have the opportunity to speak to them, catch up with them. But Chunai Senpo Sugihara was the consul general in the Japanese consular in Lithuania, in the capital Kaunas at the time. Joseph Shimkin walks up to his desk and says, "Excuse me, sir, I need a transit visa for me and my family. I need to get out of here through Japan and then onwards." Most of the Jews went then to America. Senpai said to him, "You know, that's crazy. My country will never allow it. We've just entered an alliance with Germany, but I'll ask." And so he asked. And he came back to the desk and said to Joseph, "The answer is no." And so they sat there for a moment. And Senpai said to Joseph, "What would happen if I didn't give you a transit visa?" And he said, "If you didn't give me a transit visa, me and my family will be rounded up and would be put on a train and would be shipped off and would be killed. And so Senpai sat there for a moment and looked at a box that was in the corner. I believe that was his stamping kit for his visas. He looked at the box for a minute and said, "Joseph, go home, come back and see me tomorrow." And so he did. Overnight, Senpai Sugihara hand wrote and hand stamped 300 transit visas. And each transit visa didn't only allow one person to transit through Japan, it allowed a whole family, okay? This was what the transit visas look like. So he'd stamp it there, he'd write that, the Chinese calligraphy, and he'll stamp with the consular stamp and his red seal on the bottom. He did 300 of those. Legend has it, he had blisters all through his hands doing that. And so Joseph came back the next day and collected his transit visa and disappeared. For the next 3 weeks, Senpai Sugihara was so impacted by this. Him and his wife wrote 3,000, let me check because this is important, 6,000 transit visas over 3 weeks before the Japanese government caught on to what he was doing, put him onto a train. If we go to the next photo, that's his family there, stuck him on a train and sent him to a Soviet prison camp where they served 21 months in forced labour until the war was over. Yeah. He returned to Japan as a shamed man. That was his title, a shamed man. And I'm not sure if you understand this. I've been doing karate and other things in the Japanese sphere all my life. Honour is such an incredible thing to Japanese people. For him to be called a shamed man, to have diplomatic status, and then be received into his country as a shamed man for the rest of his life would have been devastating for this man. You know, back in the day, people in his position probably would have taken their own lives. Probably. Okay. So he was stripped of his diplomatic status. He had no work to put food on the table. He had to sell light globes door to door until he died eventually in 1986. But something really special happened in 1984. The Simon Wiesenthal Centre estimates that 40,000 Jewish people are alive today just because of him. One act, yeah? Because of that skill with writing the visas and the obedience to be called to Kaunas, Lithuania in the middle of the war. 40,000 Jews are alive today. So in 1984, he was awarded the Israeli National Award called the Righteous Among the Nations. In 1985, there was a ceremony in Jerusalem. He only barely just made it there. I've seen pictures of him, really frail. And in 1986, he died still a shamed man. It wasn't only till after his death that the Japanese government, a couple of years later, changed their stance on Senpai Sugihara. And now his story is written in textbooks all across the country. And this is straight out of Wednesday's Thrive. Matt wrote this, Dr. Matt Jacoby, pastor, PhD, philosophy. You may not see any massive breakthroughs for the kingdom in your lifetime, but one day you will see how important your part was in the broad scheme of things. So what does sacrifice look like for you today? That's my challenge. What does sacrifice look like for you today? Is it letting go of an ideal? Is it letting go of a grudge? Is it getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and driving to Warragul Regional College like I did with 2 other young adults the other day? And I mean, that's a whole nother message. What is it that you have to sacrifice today? Yeah? Have a think about that. Last point. Sacrifice and impact, is knowing who you are and where you fit in the team. Can we bring up the scripture? Awesome. 1 Corinthians 12:12 says this. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. When I was preparing for this message, I kept getting woken up, by the way. by my 6-month-old, occasionally by my 4-year-old, and also God thought it would be funny to wake me up at different times of the night and go, put that in there, put that in there. And he gave me an image. He gave me an image of what I do at work, okay? And so if we throw that image up, this highlights so clearly 1 Corinthians 12:12 about each individual playing their part in the team, okay? Let me go through this with you, and just full disclosure, I've chosen another jurisdiction, so that's not Victoria. The guy at the front is holding the ballistic shield, okay? His job is to protect the rest of the team upon approach, and the rest of the team has to stand behind him. He's the one providing protection for the rest of the team. The guy behind him is what we call the cover man. His job is to stay behind the ballistic shield and assess if there's any threats coming, okay? And respond on behalf of the team if required. Because you see, the rest of the team are holding equipment that we need when we get to the door. The guy behind him, and I won't go through all of them, but what we've got manual breaching guys, we've got the hucks, we've got the ram, and then we've got the team leader, which is where I usually sit, about 5th in the stack. Being 5th in the stack usually means that you're second in. First fire team, second in. And I saw Mitch Hunter sitting there in my team. Shout out to you, Mitch. So each and every one of these guys have got a specific role to play. Imagine if the guy at the front holding the ballistic shield decides, it's not a ballistic shield day today, I might pop that down and I might pick up my machine gun. Imagine what that would look like. Imagine if the guy holding the speaker or the LRAD decides that, no, this isn't a very sexy tool. I might stick it down on the ground. I might pick up something else and walk up to the front door. If that happened, we would breach the door, waiting for the speaker to go down so we can speak to the hostage taker. But if he neglected to do his role, it wouldn't be an option for us. So you're seeing where I'm going with this. Can we go up to the next slide? If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. Just let that sink in for the moment. Here's the clincher, guys. Next passage. Next one there. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. Pump it back just one slide to the picture. What you see there, guys, is the primary entry team. That's the one that we want to get onto. What you can't see behind the stack is the alternate entry team. Like I said, everyone wants to be in the primary, but there's been an occasion, more than one, where there was another team leader there and I was relegated to the alternate entry team and I was tasked with this. $3 milk crate. And my job was, with the $3 milk crate, was to walk up behind the primary entry team. I don't know why we creep. Does it make it more tactical? But we do that. It's posture. We walk up behind the primary entry team, and as the front door's going in, the window's going in as well, which is the alternate entry team. And after the window's gone in, my job was to do this. When the rest of the team stands up on the milk crate, stands on my back, stands on my helmet, gets through the door, and I'm left holding a $3 milk crate. But I'm telling you now, guys, if it wasn't for the $3 milk crate, they wouldn't have got in through the window. So how many of you guys are sitting there thinking, my gift is a $3 milk crate and is insignificant. Because if you are, I'm telling you now, you're probably the most important part of the team. I'll give you one more scripture in 1 Corinthians 12. It says this, and the parts we regard as less honourable, I'll get the music team up now, are the ones that we clothe with greatest care. The parts we regard as less honourable are those we clothe with greatest care. Guys, if you're sitting there now thinking that the gift that God gave you is insignificant, you're vulnerable. Not only are you vulnerable, the team is vulnerable. Because if you think you're the least insignificant, you're likely not to invest in that gift. You're likely not to go out to the pasture and work with what's in your hands because you think it's insignificant. But I'm telling you now, one day, God will call you to exercise that gift, and you've got to be ready to use it. Yeah? If you're sitting there with a $3 milk crate right now, let God speak into your heart. Let God confirm to you He made you exactly the way that you are. You were designed for a purpose and a plan. I hope you hear that today, guys. Let me pray for you. Close your eyes. Lord, you know each one of our lives are part of a greater purpose that we may not see. And we also acknowledge that every good gift we have comes from you. And you have given us those gifts for a purpose. Lord, you know that what each one of us contributes is not only significant but incredibly vital. Lord, please help us take the next step, then the next step, and then the next step with the confidence that you will never leave us and never forsake us. Lord, help us identify what you want us to sacrifice in our lives today and be as gentle as with us as we let go of those things that we've held onto for so long. And Lord, help us take our $3 milk crate of a gift and have some devastating impact on this world. Amen.